Shalom, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Israel Lighthouse. I'm Zach Waller, and it is Hanukkah. And here at the Israel Lighthouse, we're super excited about this festival of lights. And we're also very excited this particular video because we're going to share a little bit about why Hanukkah is relevant and important for Christians. So I have a very special guest on today, John Enarson. Welcome, John, to the Israel Lighthouse.
Thanks so much, Zach. It's great to be here.
So, John, help us figure this out. This holiday, this feast of dedication, festival of lights. Why is it important for Christians?
It is super relevant for Christians more than you might think at first in a lot of different ways. There's really many layers to it.
Mhm.
But I find that the first thing that maybe some people are wondering is like Hanukkah doesn't seem mentioned in the Bible. Is it biblical? For Christians, like, okay, it might be a Jewish tradition, but what's that got to do with us? Kind of a thing. But it is the whole Hanukkah story is prophesied in the Bible in very great detail. So in Daniel chapter 8 and Daniel chapter 11, they go into such detail about the Hanukkah story that secular scholars would say that Daniel could not have been written before Hanukkah. But of course, Daniel's prophesying into the future, but that's how closely it corresponds to the Hanukkah story. So Daniel prophesies the whole event of the Hanukkah story and the Maccabees and everything that happened. And then secondly, we do have Jesus himself walking where? In the temple for the feast of Hanukkah, for the rededication of the temple. He didn't have to be there. It wasn't one of the feasts of the Lord where all men are required in Israel to be present in Jerusalem in the temple, but he was there. It was winter, not a very simple time to walk from Galilee to the temple. So he definitely cared about that. And we see how much his life revolved around the temple. So it's definitely very biblical. I think there's even allusion to scholars see this in Hebrews 11, the heroes of the faith. So, where you read things like they became mighty in battle and put foreign armies to flight, we start to recognize the Maccabees, but that could be others, right? But then it says others were tortured and refused their release so that they might gain a better resurrection. That seems very Hanukkah-esque to many scholars because you read Second Maccabees or something like that, the historical records of what happened. Second Maccabees is really focused on belief in the resurrection and those who were tortured and martyred for their faith. And it goes on talking about how the world was not worthy of them, how they were persecuted, and they wandered in deserts and mountains and hid in caves and holes in the ground, which is what the Maccabees did. So there's a lot of Maccabee type language in the
Mhm.
heroes of the faith in Hebrews 11.
Mhm.
So that's another reason, right? And one of the ones that's very fascinating to me is that in the story of Hanukkah, you have this wicked Greek Syrian king, Antiochus Epiphanes, and he is both given by Jesus in Matthew 24 and Paul in Second Thessalonians 2 as the number one pattern for the Antichrist. So, there's so much speculation. It's frustrating to even talk about the topic of the end times. So you wonder, sometimes you kind of give up on that topic and just kind of put it aside because it becomes so sensationalistic.
Mhm.
But if you have something like this is something that Jesus and Paul points to very specifically, the story of Hanukkah and the wicked Greek king and how he defiled the temple and what he did to God's people.
Mhm.
It starts when you read the Hanukkah story, you realize, okay, this is the real pattern for who the bad guy is, the enemy of God, and the type of spirit that the Antichrist spirit exudes, and how it goes against the Jewish people, against keeping God's commandments. It's a spirit of lawlessness. It hates the temple. It wants to defile what belongs to God, to kind
Mhm.
of take God's place and God's place of worship. So it's really been an encouragement for me to get much greater clarity on the end times. So that's like a first big batch of why it's very relevant, I would say.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Wow, that's you definitely took us for the deep dive there. Like so many of those things that you just kind of skim over, but then like, okay, wait a second. No, this really sounds like, there's something connected here. So thank you for bringing those different pieces up. Um, I think, a lot of in Christian circles, we tend to kind of personalize everything, and in some ways that's, maybe not so good, but then always it's really good, like to really take things personally as an individual. What about Hanukkah? Can we take individually? What can we learn from it? How can we grow? It's a feast of dedication, so it seems like there could be some relevancy to us as individuals.
Yes, definitely. And I think ultimately that's what I want to do each year when I celebrate Hanukkah. I celebrate Hanukkah as a Christian. And you have to dive into kind of the gospel story to see one of the big relevances. And that is, without the story of Hanukkah, you wouldn't have had the gospel. Without that miracle, the Savior would not have been born to righteous Jewish parents who were keeping God's commandments, keeping the Torah, and he wouldn't have been presented in the temple. Like the temple would have been defiled, everyone would have assimilated and become, Greek worshiping the idols, basically. And the Jewish people would have been eradicated as a distinct identity. The covenant people would be gone.
Mm,
So, but even though the temple is defiled, this is where I really, besides just a general, really teaching us a lot about withstanding assimilation and being this pressure from the world that's always trying to come, the
mm,
part that I find so fascinating is the temple was defiled by Antiochus Epiphanes. He set up a statue, an idol to Zeus on the big altar outside with his own face on it. He slaughtered pigs in the temple, defiled it. He didn't destroy it, but he definitely really defiled it. But then
mm,
the Maccabees managed miraculously to win a victory and to reconquer it. And they cleansed the temple and rededicated it to the Lord. It wasn't perfect for the coming generations. There was some corrupt leadership as the generations went by. It's about 160 years before Jesus. But there was a sect that considered the temple to be too corrupt and they left.
mm,
If you ever heard of Qumran or the Dead Sea Scrolls, they didn't want to participate in the temple. Like it just wasn't legit. There was too much corruption. Like it just can't be here. And they left for the desert and lived kind of a monkish type lifestyle down by the Dead Sea. But that's not what we see from Jesus. Like he considers the temple to be cleansed and rededicated to the Lord. He's there for Hanukkah. He loves it and calls it my Father's house. And it was ready for his coming the first time in a certain sense.
mm,
To me, that speaks personally to me that we need to dedicate, cleanse ourselves, that God can cleanse us and we can be rededicated to the Lord, and it's not too far gone. Like Jesus wasn't like some of the Jewish sects who were like, forget the temple, like it's just done. We're leaving. Like I'm totally, that's not even legit. No, it was God's house. It had been cleansed. People were worshiping the Lord in it, and that's what our lives need to be
mm,
like. And we need to really take that message that it's possible. Like there's so much grace that it's possible to rededicate ourselves, even though we've been used
mm.
so often for so many things that are defiled, to not worship the Lord, to, all the things that happen in our lives. It is possible. Hanukkah shows how it's possible to turn that around.
Wow, so powerful, and I appreciate you bringing in the temple aspect to it because obviously that's all in the Hanukkah story, and we see Yeshua goes up to the Temple Mount, cleanses the temple, and says this house will be a house of prayer for all nations, and so he's declaring yes that this edifice, this place, God's house is important, and that it has a global mission and vision for it to bring together all the nations to pray and to worship. So that's a yeah, it's powerful to think about how the Hanukkah story has such end times, like you've been talking about things, but then also very personal times for today, and it's a historical story, so it's like tying all these different pieces together throughout history in a very very powerful way. So, thank you so much for doing that. All right, so do you have one or two more points quick before we wrap it up on why Hanukkah is
Yes.
important for Christians?
I think it's possibly my favorite holiday of the year.
Mm,
just because it has this many layers of aspects and so much application. And for 8 days, eight being the biblical number of dedication, to rededicate the altar and rededicate ourselves. We have 8 days to really focus on rededicating ourselves to God.
mm,
A couple more layers. One is that we know that Jesus wasn't born at Christmas in the midst of winter. The shepherds weren't in the fields at that time of year. Scholars know that. Everybody knows, nearly. If it were to pick a time of the year, it would probably be the fall feasts
mm,
in the seventh month, the seventh biblical month, the month of Tishrei. 9 months before that would put the conception, the word becoming flesh, and the angel visiting Mary or Miriam,
mm,
his mother, would be at Hanukkah. So you've got the light of the world
mhm.
coming into the world right at Hanukkah time. And
Wow.
that's huge. So
Mm,
that's another layer for me. And then finally, I can't help but see, both in the church, but in particularly in Israel, you've got these two sides, the people contending for assimilation, for
mm,
apostasy, for becoming like the world. And they are in conflict with the people who are saying, no, we're going to remain faithful to the covenant. Even if we're small, if we're outnumbered, we are going to trust in the Lord, and we won't back down even if we're persecuted. And you see this play out in Israel. So I often, just looking around society, I'm trying to explain all the different politics and pressures and culture are happening in Israel to other people. I'm like, it's like the Hanukkah story. I wish you knew the Hanukkah story. I wish you celebrated
mm,
Hanukkah so you could know what's going on here.
mm.
So those would be two more aspects, I think,
Mm.
of the festival that's huge to me.
Wow. That's amazing. Well, thank you so much, John, for sharing these points. Just nailed it right out. And I think you've given us a lot of reason why it's important for Christians to celebrate this feast, to connect with it. So thank you so much for doing that. As you've spoken, we can definitely hear that you're very knowledgeable about the Temple Mount. So can you share with us real quick before you go, your position at Cry for Zion and how all our listeners can connect with you at Cry for Zion?
Absolutely. I'm the Christian Relations Director at Cry for Zion. So it's cryforzion.com. We have educational articles. We just put out a huge film called I Am Israel 2, which your brother also is in.
Hmm.
Really great film about the Temple Mount, introducing the topic. And now I'm trying to finish a big book
Hmm.
on the Temple Mount called Jesus and the Temple Mount. You can connect with that on the website, cryforzion.com.
Excellent. Well, I'm super excited about that book. Can't wait to see the finished product. But thank you so much, John, for coming on today and for sharing with us. Blessings to you, and Hanukkah Sameach.
Happy Hanukkah.